Over the years, this card has had its ups and downs, rising to become the king of defense, zapping everything in sight, and fitting seamlessly into any deck. But there were times when it vanished, buried beneath the meta, forgotten as other cards stole the spotlight. It felt like the Tesla's spark had dimmed, unnoticed by many. Yet when everyone thought its time had passed, the Tesla would resurface stronger, sharper, and ready to make its mark once again. It's a card that keeps bouncing back, reminding us that even when it's out of sight, its power is always waiting to shock the arena once more. Now let's explore the exciting history of the Tesla, tracing its path from the moment it first sparked to life to where it stands today, and uncovering how this unique card keeps shocking the Clash Royale arena. This is the full history of the Tesla. The Tesla was introduced when Clash Royale launched on January 4th, 2016, instantly becoming a staple in defensive strategies. But what makes this card even more intriguing is that its design is rooted in real history. Inspired by the legendary inventor Nikola Tesla and his groundbreaking invention, the Tesla coil, this card channels the same electric energy. Just like how Tesla's coil produced powerful lightning-like discharges, the Tesla in Clash Royale zaps enemies with precision and force. Even though it's just a card in the game, its origins trace back to one of the most iconic scientific creations in history. So right from the start, it was designed to be a unique defensive card, with its ability to hide underground and pop out to zap enemy troops. The Tesla added a cool twist to defense. It's a useful feature because it can't be outranged by any troop. It only becomes visible when enemy troops get within its range. Other defensive buildings can easily be outranged and taken out by a simple musketeer or dart goblin. But what also set the Tesla apart was that it was one of the only defensive buildings, alongside the Inferno Tower, that could target air troops. This made it a valuable asset for players facing flying attackers, giving them an edge in defending against a variety of threats. The Inferno Tower was mainly used against tanks, and considering the Lava Hound hadn't been added yet, the Tesla was also the best defensive building for flying units. Before the Tesla made its appearance in Clash Royale, it was already a familiar sight in Clash of Clans. In fact, the Tesla is one of the 7 buildings that made the jump from Clash of Clans into Clash Royale, along with the Cannon, Mortar, Goblin Hut, Inferno Tower, Elixir Collector, and Expo. In Clash of Clans, it's known as the Hidden Tesla, a building that stays invisible until the enemy troops come within range, and it's capable of dealing some serious damage once triggered. In Clash Royale, however, it's simply called the Tesla, and while it shares some similarities with its original design, like its ability to hide underground, there are a few key differences. For starters, the Clash Royale Tesla can retreat underground when there are no valid targets, something its Clash of Clans counterpart does not do, while underground in Royale, it's still visible to all players, unlike the fully invisible Hidden Tesla in Clash of Clans. The Clash Royale Tesla also faces some unique threats. While it's hidden, it's still vulnerable to spells like Earthquake and Freeze, meaning players can knock it out of the game even while it's underground. And if you're a fan of cosmetics, the Tesla's Star Level 2 skin in Clash Royale even resembles the Level 6 Hidden Tesla from Clash of Clans, adding a nice little touch for longtime fans of both games. The first month of Clash Royale's release, Tesla was overshadowed a lot by Tombstone. Tesla saw a 2% usage rate in the top 100, whereas the Tombstone saw a staggering 68%. It had the highest usage rate out of all cards. Back then, the Tombstone would spawn 6 skeletons upon destruction, and it had a lifetime of 60 seconds. It was basically a building that spawned a skeleton army upon destruction. The Tombstone was a cost-effective counter to nearly every form of attack. Whether it's a prince heading straight for your tower or a giant advancing, the Tombstone can effectively distract them and inflict some good damage. Other defensive buildings saw little to no play, and so the developer team responded with a nerf. Well, 2 nerfs, actually. The first nerf decreasing the skeleton spawned upon death from 6 to 4, and the second decreasing the Tombstone's lifetime from 60 down to 40 seconds. All the while, their Hog Rider continued to gain popularity, being the key threat in many decks. With the Tombstone nerf, the Hog Rider had less trouble reaching the tower. This is where our Tesla surged to the #1 building spot. Getting a 7% damage buff, the Tesla was able to reach similar results to the Tombstone, being able to neatly defend a Hog Rider or Giant. Not only that, but it could even help take out minions or baby dragons. But before the Tombstone nerf, it just wasn't worth having a Tesla in your deck, considering it cost 1 elixir more. more. But now that the tombstone couldn't fulfill its duty anymore, that one extra elixir was totally worth it. The Tesla became the most cost-effective defensive building, considering the bomb tower and inferno tower cost 5 elixir and the cannon cost 6. Yeah. Really. The cannon was given a rework though, reducing its elixir cost from 6 down to 3, though its range would decrease from 7 to 6 tiles, it would lose 55% of its hit points, and also have its lifetime decreased from 60 seconds down to 40. Even though this rework made the cannon a more viable option, it wasn't nearly as popular as the Tesla. With Tesla being an answer to a wide variety of cards, it became the #1 defensive building with a 29% usage rate. But it wouldn't maintain this #1 spot for long. Unfortunately, after getting a taste of glory, the Tesla received a 5% health nerf, a 0.1 second slower attack speed, and its lifetime would drop from 60 seconds down to 40 seconds, falling in line with the other buildings. These nerfs helped the Tesla quickly drop to a 7% usage rate in a single month. So what building would now take the crown as the most reliable and cost-effective option? Was it the cannon, perhaps the Inferno Tower, or maybe even the Bomb Tower? Well, surprisingly, none of these. It was the Elixir Collector. Yep, the building that doesn't deal any damage and doesn't spawn any troops upon its destruction. That was now the best option. The Elixir Collector used to have way more health that was nearly identical to a Valkyrie. It would take a lot more damage while still generating elixir for you. Oh, I forgot to mention, back in early 2016, the pump was also only 5 elixir. So for only 5 elixir, players were able to distract hog riders, giants, and golems while also generating more elixir. And the Elixir Collector was gaining more popularity for the following months. It was so extremely versatile that in the month of May, it was not just the most popular building, but also the most popular card. It sat in the top ladder with a 74% usage rate. But that wasn't the only popular building. Players had picked up the cannon. Even though it was overshadowed before, it definitely gained popularity. In April, the cannon already saw a 29% usage rate. The Elixir Collector was a highly versatile card, but it really stood out when used for its main purpose: generating elixir. Rather than competing with other buildings for a spot in decks, it found its place alongside the cannon, with both cards often paired together. Despite receiving multiple health nerfs, both the Elixir Collector and the cannon managed to hold their spots in the top 10 most used cards in top ladder for several months. The Elixir Collector in particular became an essential part in top tier play, peaking on October 11th with a staggering 88% usage rate. While the Collector thrived, the Tesla barely saw the light of day. On a good day, it might scrape together a 1% usage rate, but it usually sat at a bleak 0. Players began to wonder why the Tesla wasn't being used as much as the cannon. With this Redditor asking, does someone have insight as to why the Tesla isn't gaining on cannon? It can't just be the 1 elixir difference, is it? Well, it actually was that 1 elixir difference. The cannon continued to be a frequent choice, but after a series of nerfs, it was eventually overtaken by the Inferno Tower. Then at the end of October, the Elixir Collector was hit with a major nerf, raising its elixir cost from 5 to 6. This change was brutal. Overnight, 83% of players dropped the card, and its once dominant presence in top ladder vanished almost instantly. The meta had shifted quite a bit as the Expo saw an increase of 16% in the top ladder, and as a result, the Inferno Tower experienced a rise in popularity, serving as both a solid counter and a great support for the Expo. Meanwhile, the cannon had fallen to a mere 3% usage rate, and the Tesla was still sitting at a disappointing 0%, struggling to find its place. As for the Bomb Tower, well, it hadn't budged from its 0% usage rate either, continuing to be left in the dust. In November, the Tombstone surged back into popularity. At the time, the Inferno Tower was a dominant force, which kept the Golem in check and out of the spotlight. However, things took a sharp turn when the Lightning spell received a crucial buff. It now had the ability to stun troops and buildings, allowing it to reset the Inferno Tower's devastating charge. This change made Lightning a powerful counter to the Inferno Tower. As a result, Golem plus Lightning decks skyrocketed in usage, and by the end of the month, Lightning was sitting at a staggering 60% usage rate, while Golem followed close behind at 40%. On the flip side, the Inferno Tower's dominance began to wane, dropping from a 40% 20% to 26% usage rate. While it wasn't entirely gone from the meta, it was no longer the go-to building it once was. That title now belonged to the Tombstone, which provided an effective and cheap defense against golem decks. For just 3 elixir, Tombstone could slow down and distract a golem. And it wasn't worth it for golem players to waste a 6 elixir lightning just to remove a 3 elixir Tombstone. The balance had shifted, and Tombstone had quietly become one of the most valuable defensive buildings in the game. But this video is about Tesla. So where has our electric building been? Aside from its brief appearance at the start of 2016, the Tesla was practically non-existent in top ladder play. Despite multiple health buffs from the dev team aimed at breathing some life into the card, it simply couldn't break through. Nothing seemed to work. For over a year, it was stuck in the shadows with a 0% usage rate, lingering in the background while other cards took the spotlight. From 2016 all the way to November of 2017, Tesla remained forgotten, buried beneath the battlefield, hidden away and waiting for its moment to finally resurface. So, what happened in November of 2017 that caught the people's attention on the Tesla? Well, the Tesla would receive a rework that would forever change the way we perceive the card. Its hit speed would decrease, going from every 0.8 seconds to every 1 second. But in return, it received an incredible 41% damage increase. This was massive for Tesla. Before this rework, Tesla couldn't take down minions or goblins with a single hit. However, after the changes, it was now capable of one-shotting both of these units. Plus, it could take down most other troops with just 1 less hit. The Tesla would go from a 0% usage rate to a 7.5, which isn't huge, but considering it was at 0% for nearly 2 years, it was definitely a positive change. This was also where we see the birth of one of the most toxic card combos in Clash Royale history. The Tesla paired with the Expo was, and is, extremely annoying to deal with. Expo players would put an Expo at the bridge accompanied by a Tesla right next to it. The Expo required an immediate response because otherwise it would just lock onto the tower. But with the new Tesla being able to one-shot minions and goblins, the opponent couldn't just throw some minions on top of the Expo to take out most of its hit points. The Tesla would now make quick work of that. However, this isn't the only reason Tesla works so well with the Expo. Tesla's gimmick being that it can hide underground when out of combat made it immune to spells. Opponents couldn't just chuck a fireball your way, as the Tesla would just go underground, making the Tesla and Expo a truly obnoxious duo. The following month, the Tesla climbed to a 15.5% usage rate in top ladder, and despite this being quite low, it was the #1 defensive building at top level. Surprisingly, much of the Tesla's success during this period was thanks to the Tornado spell. Tornado had become the go-to option for replacing traditional defensive buildings, because instead of relying on a 3 elixir cannon to defend against a Hog Rider, a defensive building vulnerable to spells like Fireball, players could use the Tornado to pull the Hog Rider into the King Tower, activating it for future defenses. Tornado proved to be incredibly reliable because unlike buildings, it couldn't be destroyed by spells or troops, making it a flexible and durable alternative. In this environment, the Tesla's unique ability to hide underground gave it an edge, especially when paired with Expo decks. The Tesla's stealth mechanic allowed it to avoid taking damage until enemies got within range, making it a strong companion for the Expo, which needed reliable defense to protect its long-ranged attacks. This combination made Tesla a perfect fit for siege decks, particularly with the Expo. One interesting detail about the Tesla is its unusual hitbox compared to other buildings. Most buildings in the game fall into one of 2 categories: passive buildings and active buildings. Passive buildings like the Barbarian Hut and Furnace don't directly interact with enemy troops and have a 1-tile hitbox. Active buildings, on the other hand, like the Expo and Inferno Tower, actively engage with units on the battlefield and have a 0.6-tile hitbox. However, the Tesla has a 0.5-tile hitbox, which is smaller than any other building. This smaller hitbox allows the Tesla to fit closer to the Expo on the battlefield, making it easier to clean up nearby enemy troops and further reinforcing the synergy between these 2 cards. From November 2017 to January of 2018, the Expo and Tesla combination terrorized top ladder players, becoming one of the most dominant strategies in the game at the time. The Tesla's ability to pop up just in time, combined with the Expo's long range and power, proved to be an overwhelming challenge for many opponents. Throughout January, the Expo and Tesla combo took a bit of a hit, largely due to the rise of beatdown decks that could overpower their defensive setups. Over the next few months, Tesla's usage rate hovered around 10%, showing that while it wasn't dominating, it hadn't completely disappeared from the meta either. Interestingly, during this time, the Tesla started to make appearances in different archetypes that we now recognize as log bait. While in 2024, log bait decks are most commonly paired with the Inferno Tower, back in the earlier days of Clash Royale, Tesla was frequently the go-to choice for log bait players. This trend began to pick up momentum in 2018. Log bait heavily depended on the Tesla for defense, as much of the deck strategy involved pressuring the opponent. While cards like Knight or Valkyrie could hold their own on defense, they often fell short against larger threats like giants. Deploying a Goblin Gang against a giant could easily lead to disaster, especially if the opponent had a small spell or support unit ready to counter it. Enter the Tesla, a game changer that effectively addressed these defensive challenges. While the Goblin Gang could quickly get wiped out by a small spell when facing a giant, the Tesla offered a more reliable solution. It took some time for players to realize that the Inferno Tower eventually provided even greater value and utility in the current meta. Despite its growing presence in log bait decks, the Tesla remained best known for its role in siege strategies, particularly alongside the Expo. Outside of those two main archetypes, the Tesla didn't get much love in top ladder. It was primarily popular in Expo and log bait decks, but even with its limited presence, it still received a nerf in June. This update cut its lifetime from 40 seconds down to 35, meaning it stayed on the battlefield for a shorter period after successfully defending. But the bigger hit came with a change to its hit speed, slowing it down from 1 second to 1.1 seconds. It could still one-shot units like goblins and minions, just a bit slower than before. Despite this nerf, the Tesla remained a staple in siege decks. It just became a little bit easier for opponents to deal with this strategy. From June to the end of 2018, while the deck didn't dominate in usage, it never completely disappeared from the meta either. It held its ground, showing that even with a nerf, the Tesla was far from irrelevant. On December 3rd, the Tesla received a seemingly small but important buff. Its first attack speed was reduced from 0.7 seconds down to 0.5, allowing it to rise from the ground and engage with enemies just a little bit faster. While this doesn't seem like a huge change on paper, it had a noticeable impact on the performance of Tesla-based decks. This slight improvement allowed the Tesla to respond quicker to threats, making it a more reliable choice. One perfect example of how the Tesla thrived after this buff can be seen in the Roach of the Stars challenge, where Surgical Goblin showcased a classic 2.9 Elixir Expo Tesla cycle deck. Surgical Goblin not only demonstrated the potential of this strategy, but also managed to go 15 wins without a single loss, proving how powerful the buff made the Tesla in this setup. Surgical Goblin also mentions the success of another pro player, Air Surfer, who used this very deck in the global tournament. In this tournament, Air Surfer reached the #1 spot using the exact same Expo Tesla deck, amassing a jaw-dropping 90 wins. For those unfamiliar with the global tournament format, players are eliminated after 5 losses, with no chances to re-enter or continue. But back in 2018, you would be eliminated after 4 losses, making Air Surfer's achievement all the more impressive. The Tesla's buff, though small, undoubtedly had a big impact on the competitive scene, proving once again that even minor adjustments can completely change the dynamics of the game. At the beginning of 2019, the 2.9 Expo Tesla deck faced increased challenges as beatdown decks regained popularity. However, history has shown us that even a slight shift in the meta can have a profound impact. In April, a new spell made its way from Clash of Clans to Clash Royale, the Earthquake. This 3 elixir spell was designed specifically to target buildings, dealing over 3 times as much damage to structures as it did to troops. And as a result, it seemed like a natural counter to Expo decks, where the Tesla played a significant role. Interestingly, the Expo didn't struggle as much as one might expect. This was largely due to the Earthquake's specific use case. It became nearly useless against opponents who didn't include any buildings in their decks. The Expo archetype was one of the few that utilized buildings effectively, while other popular decks like beatdown and graveyard strategies largely operated without them. And let's not even mention the Elixir Collector. It was collecting dust instead of elixir. Committing a card slot to Earthquake was a risky choice, as it only offered a significant advantage against Expo decks. In most other matchups, it would simply be a wasted card, leaving players with little incentive to include it in their strategies. While the Earthquake was a cool addition into the game, its impact was limited by the fact that buildings weren't prominent in the meta, rendering the spell less effective and ultimately not a proper choice among players. But luckily for our Tesla and the deck it resides in, this was only one more reason to keep thriving. In the month of August, Surtag says he loves this deck so much that he commits to playing only that deck for the entire ladder season, even stating in the description that, quote, "This Clash Royale Expo Cycle deck is the Clash Royale best ladder deck at the moment." The Tesla still mainly appeared in Expo decks, but within that archetype, it was simply unbeatable. Its synergy with Expo made it a key defensive asset, offering reliability and effectiveness that few other buildings could match. One key aspect worth noting, as Surtag explains, is the strategy of playing for a draw. He points out that this deck gave him the ability to force a draw in almost any bad matchup. Now, you might have forgotten, or maybe never even knew, but back in the day, draws were a common occurrence in Clash Royale. If both players had the same number of towers standing after a sudden death, the game would end in a tie, regardless of whether one player had more health on their tower. So when an Expo player realized they were up against a tough matchup, they could easily switch to a defensive playstyle and simply wait out the timer. With Tesla's incredible defensive capabilities and the ability to cycle back to it quickly, it became nearly impossible for the opponent to break through. This ensured that the Expo player didn't lose any trophies, and this tactic was extremely toxic, leaving the opponent with no choice but to sit through the rest of the match without hope of breaking the stalemate. Luckily, on the 30th of September, Supercell introduced Tiebreakers. A tiebreaker occurs when a battle reaches the end of overtime without either player managing to take down a crown tower completely. When this happens, the match doesn't end in a draw. Instead, the game activates the tiebreaker rule, which are as follow. The crown tower's HP are compared. The player whose towers have more HP remaining at the end of overtime is declared the winner. If one player has even a slight advantage in total HP on their towers, they'll win the match. This tiebreaker update had a major impact on the Siege archetype. Now players could no longer rely on forcing a draw to avoid a trophy loss. Though this wouldn't stop Expo users from being toxic, players soon developed a new variant of the Expo deck, this time incorporating the Rocket, a more expensive but surprisingly effective addition. The Rocket served as an alternate win condition, which sounds crazy, but it worked. Spells do have reduced crown tower damage, and this has always been a thing. At the launch of the game, though, this was 50%. Shortly after, this was reduced down to 40%. At that time this strategy was viable, it was 35%. At the time that this strategy was viable, it was 35% crown tower damage, which is 5% more than the current 30% of today. If the Expo player couldn't break through with their siege, they'd fall back on a strategy similar to the old playing for a draw approach, but this time, there was one major difference. While defending, they generate passive elixir trades, gaining an advantage over their opponent. With that extra elixir, they'd start cycling rockets onto the enemy's princess tower, chipping away at it for a solid 500 damage each time. All the while, they'd keep cycling back to their defenses, making it nearly impossible for the opponent to push through. This toxic playstyle was arguably even worse than forcing a draw, because now, instead of ending with no trophy loss, the opponent would be steadily losing trophies as the rockets flew in. And while this strategy was arguably more toxic, the introduction of the tiebreaker feature definitely helped tone down the dominance that the Expo and Tesla had been exerting on the meta. On November 4th, the Elixir Golem was introduced to Clash Royale, and this purple blob made quite the impact. In fact, it was so disruptive that on the very day of its release, it was hit with a 10% health nerf across all of its forms. But even after the nerf, the Elixir Golem was still running wild, trampling through the arenas. Popular decks quickly emerged, combining it with the Night Witch and Battle Healer, creating a brand new beatdown archetype. Expo decks, notoriously bad at handling this new wave of aggression, struggled heavily, and when the Expo struggled, so too did the Tesla. But while Tesla started to fade, a different building, long forgotten, began to rise: the Bomb Tower. After years of silence, the Bomb Tower finally found its place in the meta. Thanks to its hefty HP and splash damage, it became a perfect counter to the Elixir Golem, tanking its hits while dishing out damage to its smaller forms, making it an extremely reliable option in this new era of beatdown madness. There were quite a bit of different decks using the Bomb Tower, from Miner Control to Balloon Cycle. Elixir Golem was very popular, and the Bomb Tower tried to keep it in check. Luckily, the Elixir Golem's reign was of short duration, as in December, the smaller blob's attack speed was nerfed significantly. The bomb tower, though, kept going well, despite Elixir Golem taking a step back in the meta. Interestingly, buildings like the Barbarian Hut and Goblin Hut also experienced a brief resurgence, often paired with cards such as the Three Musketeers and Flying Machine, to form spellbait decks that kept opponents guessing. However, with this rise in buildings came a notable increase in Earthquake, which began to bury the Tesla deeper into obscurity. The situation worsened for the Tesla when the Earthquake received a crucial buff, allowing it to damage the Tesla even while it was underground. This change made it increasingly difficult for players to rely on the Tesla for effective defense, as its unique underground ability was no longer a safeguard against damage, and as a result, players found themselves gravitating towards more reliable options such as the Inferno Tower, leaving the Tesla struggling to remain relevant in the rapidly shifting meta. From 2020 onward, Clash Royale saw a significant reduction in the frequency of balance changes and updates. This shift led to a more stagnant meta, where decks and strategies remained stable for extended periods. Unfortunately, this meant that the Tesla, already in a less than favorable position, would continue to languish in obscurity for an even longer time. With fewer adjustments to the game, players had to adapt to the Tesla's limitations, often opting for more viable options that could better withstand the evolving challenges in the arena. As a result, the Tesla's potential went largely untapped, leaving it trapped in a cycle of underutilization and diminishing relevance. The meta experienced a notable shift in favor of the Tesla throughout 2021, leading to a point where it caught the attention of the dev team. By September, it received a nerf that reduced its lifetime from 40 seconds down to 35. While its overall usage rate remained relatively low, the Tesla was once again proving its worth in siege decks. As the popularity of Earthquake began to wane, siege strategies started to make a gradual comeback. Beyond its role in siege, the Tesla also started to see more action in other deck archetypes. It re-emerged in log-bait decks as we discussed earlier, but it also found a place as a reliable defensive option in various other compositions. The Tesla once again proved to overshadow other buildings in the meta, leading to its second nerf in December. This time, the nerf significantly impacted its reputation, as it involved an increase in hit speed from 1.1 seconds to 1.2. This adjustment was particularly notable because it affected the Tesla's effectiveness in defending against swarms and faster troops. It's important to recognize that nerfs don't always occur solely because a card is overpowered. Sometimes the developers aim to shake up the meta and encourage variety by allowing other cards to step into roles that had previously been dominated by cards like the Tesla. In 2022, the Tesla's usage rate remained fairly stable, neither dipping nor spiking, and it hovered around a modest 5% in grand challenges. Throughout the year, the Tesla didn't receive any nerfs or buffs, keeping its performance steady. However, one significant development was the introduction of champions, particularly the Archer Queen. The Archer Queen was so powerful that there was even a tip on the loading screen proclaiming, "Archer Queen isn't OP." The Archer Queen quickly became a staple in decks that combined Royal Hogs with the Earthquake, and as we've seen in the past, the resurgence of Earthquake often leads to a decline in Tesla's effectiveness. Adding to the Tesla's woes, the Archer Queen's ability to cloak herself using her cloaking cape further diminished the Tesla's value. While other buildings remain visible and can absorb damage while the Archer Queen activates her ability, the Tesla goes underground and becomes inaccessible, giving it yet another disadvantage in this matchup. As a result, the Tesla found itself struggling to compete against this powerful new contender in the meta. In 2023, the Tesla received a hit speed nerf, changing it from 1.1 seconds to 1.2. Despite not dominating the meta at this time, the nerf still hit the card, contributing to its continued decline in usage. This change left many players rethinking the viability of Tesla in their decks, especially in fast cycle strategies. Tesla wasn't at an all-time low like before, but it definitely wasn't performing great either. It managed to stay relevant in some niche strategies, but its overall impact in the meta had significantly faded. The year 2024 did bring some exciting changes for the Tesla. With the introduction of evolutions in June of 2023, we witnessed the rise of cards that had long been stuck at the bottom of the meta, like the Wizard. In November of 2024, Clash Royale teased 6 new evolutions, one of which was the Tesla. Released in March of 2024, the evolved Tesla was nothing short of incredible, achieving a remarkable 14% usage rate in grand challenges. This upgraded version boasted increased health and unleashed an electric pulse every time it rose from the ground, dealing damage to all enemy troops within its radius. Not only did this pulse inflict damage, but it also stunned opponents for a full second, allowing the evolved Tesla to reset the Inferno Dragon and Sparky's damage. With the added health and the formidable pulse, the evolved Tesla became a nightmare for opponents. The fact that it was frequently played in fast-cycle expo decks meant that players could quickly cycle back to this powerful version of the Tesla. However, just 2 months later, the dev team removed the health buff, but in an effort to preserve the evolution, introduced a death pulse effect that activated upon destruction. This change only amplified the Tesla's strength, as the pulse upon destruction further contributed to its dominance. In June, the dev team decided to reduce the pulse damage by 22.9% and halve the stun duration from 1 second to 0.5. Despite these adjustments, the Tesla continued to shine in various archetypes. However, the dev team struck again just a month later, further decreasing the Tesla's damage by 4% and increasing its hit speed from 1.1 seconds to 1.2. For players with the evolved Tesla, these changes might have felt fair, but for those relying on the standard version, it seemed like an underlying cycle of nerfs. The latest nerf seemed a bit excessive. Players spoke up about their outrage on Reddit. They felt that the Tesla was being messed with too much without being properly balanced. Players were claiming that these balance changes were killing the card for no reason. Luckily, the dev team actually listened. By October, the Tesla made a comeback with its hit speed returning to 1.1 seconds. However, to prevent it from becoming too powerful again, the dev team decided to remove the death pulse feature entirely. As of October of 2024, the Tesla is still seen in expo decks and logbait decks, currently sitting at a healthy 7% usage rate. An interesting note is how players tend to use Tesla without putting it in the evolution slot, as the only added benefit now is the pulse when it rises, which usually only happens once. As we look to the future, the Tesla's journey in Clash Royale has been nothing short of remarkable. Once a niche option, it's weathered storms of balance changes, meta shifts, and evolving strategies, proving itself time and time again as a reliable defensive building. With the continuous evolution of the game and the introduction of new mechanics and cards, there's no telling how the Tesla will adapt. Will it find its way back into the spotlight as a key player in the meta, or will new contenders rise to challenge its place? Only one thing is certain. As Clash Royale continues to evolve, the Tesla will remain a fascinating card to watch, with the potential for future adaptations that could redefine its role in the game once again. Only time will tell what the future holds for this iconic building. But if you think the Tesla story was insane, just wait until you hear about the history of the giant skeleton. This card had the biggest impact in the game, obliterating everything in its path with one big black bomb. Trust me, you won't want to miss this one. Go watch it now.